The ferry ramp was never quiet for long. Even in the earliest hours, before ticket windows opened and before the first engines started their steady rumble, the structure held the memory of movement. Salt stains marked the concrete where tides had risen and fallen for years. Bolts and seams in the metal plates showed thin lines of rust, and the textured surface carried the scratches of tires, bicycle wheels, and boots pressed down in repetition. At low tide, more of the ramp revealed itself. The lower sections, usually submerged, lay slick with algae and scattered shells. The water pulled back just enough to expose the boundary between human construction and the bay's restless surface. Small fish flickered in the shallows, darting between shadows cast by the pilings. The air smelled sharper at that hour. Salt, diesel residue from yesterday's crossings, and faint traces of bait and seaweed caught along the edges. By mid-morning, the terminal began to wake. A crew member unlocked the gate leading to the boarding lane. Another checked the chain tension along the vehicle barriers. Radios crackled softly as the ferry prepared for arrival. Nearby, passengers gathered, some with backpacks, some with shopping bags, and many with coolers that bore the signs of coastal routine. Stickers, sun-faded plastic, handles wrapped in tape. Coolers were common here. They carried packed lunches, drinks for the ride, sometimes groceries returning home. Others held bait or ice for fishing trips planned across the water. Most were sealed tight, lids pressed down and straps secured, not just to preserve temperature, but to prevent spills or unwanted smells drifting outward. The tide shifted again. Ripples spread across the waterline near the ramp's corner, subtle at first, then followed by the appearance of something smoother than the surface itself. A seal surfaced quietly, its head emerging without splash, dark eyes reflecting the brightness above. It lingered. The animal hovered in place, buoyed by small currents turning along the submerged concrete. Its whiskers trembled slightly as it exhaled, droplets falling back into the bay. Harbor seals often explored working docks and ramps, drawn by the possibility of fish scraps or the curiosity that comes from environments rich with movement and scent. A man leaning on the railing spotted it first. He tapped his companion lightly and nodded toward the water. Soon others noticed, a cluster of passengers shifting closer, though still behind the painted safety line. Phones appeared. Conversations softened into murmurs of interest. The seal lifted its head higher. It rotated slowly, observing the shifting shapes above. Shoes approaching and retreating, bags swinging, coolers resting momentarily on the ground. It did not rush forward. It did not retreat. It simply floated, evaluating. Nearby, a crew member took notice. He stepped toward the edge, hands relaxed, and assessed the distance. Encounters like this were not rare, but they required subtle management. He spoke briefly into his radio, then addressed the nearest passengers in an even tone. Please keep food packed away and remain behind the line. No urgency, just procedure. One traveler adjusted a cooler strap. Another folded a sandwich wrapper tighter before placing it back inside a bag. The seal watched these motions closely, not understanding packaging, but reacting to scent and sound patterns learned over time. The ferry approached. Its hull cut through the water, pushing a low wake that spread outward. As it neared the ramp, engines shifted pitch, and ropes were readied. The seal dipped briefly beneath the surface, reappearing seconds later several meters away, repositioning in response to the disturbance. Boarding preparations began. Passengers lined up. The ramp gate lowered. Tires rolled forward slowly. Footsteps filled the air with steady rhythm. The seal surfaced again near the ramp's edge, eyes tracking movement as people crossed overhead. One fisherman paused beside his cooler. He glanced toward the water, then down at the latch. With deliberate care, he pressed it closed again before stepping forward. It was a small act, unconscious even, but part of the culture that had grown around working harbors. Minimize attention, Reduce risk, respect proximity. The seal remained calm. It floated just outside the shadow of the ramp, watching until the stream of passengers thinned and the ferry pulled away. As the wake settled, it surfaced one final time, then slipped beneath the waterline without trace. The terminal resumed its rhythm. Passengers dispersed. The next line formed. Coolers rested quietly beside their owners, sealed and orderly. And though nothing dramatic had happened, the presence of the seal lingered, a reminder that in places where sea meets structure, awareness travels both directions. Above, people learned to keep things closed. Below, something patient continued to watch. By midday, the ferry terminal no longer felt tentative or quiet. It was fully awake, loud in the way that comes from overlapping motion rather than chaos. Engines idled in long vehicle lines. Doors slammed. Rolling luggage wheels clicked across concrete. The loudspeaker announced boarding times in steady intervals, its voice flattened by repetition, yet still guiding the entire space. Sunlight struck the ramp directly now. The algae-dark sections below the waterline darkened to near black, while the upper plates reflected glare that made people squint. Heat lifted faint smells from everything it touched: rubber tires, warm metal, plastic cooler lids, and traces of fish carried on clothing or packaging. The air became layered: salt and machinery beneath, food and sunscreen above. The seal returned again. It surfaced near the same corner, appearing with the same quiet efficiency. No splash, no dramatic breach, only a smooth emergence shaped by experience in busy waters. Its head rose just enough for the eyes and nose to clear the surface, whiskers catching light as droplets fell. A few passengers noticed immediately. This time, recognition spread faster. Word traveled along the waiting line in low conversation. "It's back." People shifted their stance slightly, adjusting positions while staying behind the painted boundary line. Some smiled. Some simply observed without comment. The seal drifted closer. It did not approach the ramp itself, but maintained a parallel presence along its edge. The currents here were predictable, looping gently between pilings and concrete surfaces. Floating required little effort, just small adjustments of flippers beneath the waterline. The crew noticed, too. A deckhand stepped out from the vehicle lane and scanned the water before signaling toward the supervisor booth. Moments later, the loudspeaker carried a familiar message. "Reminder to all passengers, please keep food secured and coolers closed while waiting to board." The announcement blended into background sound for most. But for those sitting on benches eating lunch, it prompted subtle action. Wrappers folded inward, bottles capped. A cooler lid that had been cracked open for ice adjustment clicked shut again. The seal watched these movements. Its head turned slightly with each change, following the gestures rather than understanding them. Wildlife in harbors respond to signals of opportunity: scent dispersal, container opening sounds, items lowered toward water. Today, those signals remained minimal. A family with 2 children sat near the railing. One child held a small packet of crackers, swinging it idly while looking toward the water. A parent noticed the seal watching and gently guided the packet into a backpack instead. The action carried no tension, simply routine caution shaped by experience and signage. The seal surfaced higher once, then sank back to floating level. It remained patient. Further down the line, 2 anglers discussed tide conditions beside a pair of large coolers. Their gear carried unmistakable fish odor despite being sealed. The seal oriented toward them briefly, hovering closer by several feet before drifting back as the current shifted. Neither cooler opened. Straps stayed secured. Latches stayed tight. The anglers focused on conversation rather than curiosity, accustomed to harbor wildlife appearing and disappearing without engagement. Boarding began again. Vehicles rolled first, engines growling as they advanced onto the ramp. The vibration passed through the concrete into the water, sending subtle signals outward. The seal dipped beneath the surface briefly, not fleeing, simply adjusting, then resurfaced beyond the ramp's shadow. Pedestrians followed. Shoes crossed in steady sequence. Some slowed momentarily to glance down, others continued forward without pause. The crew maintained flow with quiet gestures, ensuring no one lingered near edges where attention could become distraction. One moment of tension appeared. A traveler set a cooler down while adjusting a backpack strap. The lid lifted slightly under shifting weight. Just a fraction. A deckhand nearby spoke immediately, calm and direct. "Please secure that before boarding." The traveler complied, snapping the latch into place. The lid sealed again. The moment passed before scent or sound could travel far. Below, the seal surfaced once more. It hovered, observing as the final passengers crossed. Nothing fell, nothing opened, no opportunity formed. As the ferry departed, its wake pushed outward in widening ripples. The seal turned with the movement, letting the water carry it briefly before swimming beyond the disturbed zone. The ramp cleared. Workers rinsed sections of concrete to maintain traction. Waiting lines reorganized. The next group of travelers arrived carrying their own coolers and bags, unaware of the earlier quiet exchange between animal presence and human habit. By afternoon, the seal did not reappear, but its influence remained embedded in behavior. Passengers kept lids closed without reminder. Crew announcements became shorter, less frequent. The system of awareness, shared between signage, memory, and observation, functioned smoothly, because in busy ferry terminals, safety and order depend less on rules alone and more on patterns learned through repetition. And that day, like the morning before it, those patterns held steady. The coolers stayed closed. By evening, the ferry terminal carried a different energy. The intensity of midday had faded, replaced by slower movement and longer pauses between announcements. Shadows stretched across the boarding lanes, and the glare that had bounced off the metal plates earlier softened into warm reflections of amber and blue. Wind shifted direction, carrying cooler air inland from the bay. It smelled cleaner now, less like hot machinery, more like tidewater and distant kelp beds. The ramp itself looked darker. Moisture returned as the tide crept upward again, reclaiming the lower sections of concrete. The algae slick line disappeared beneath the surface, and small waves folded gently over the edge. Lights along the terminal flickered on one by one, creating bright cones that shimmered on the water below. Travelers gathered for the final crossings. Fewer families now, more commuters. People moved with the quiet efficiency of those who simply wanted to reach the other side. Coolers were still present, some carrying groceries, others drinks from the day, but they were handled with the same habitual care seen earlier. The seal surfaced again. Its appearance felt almost expected by this point, though no one had spoken of expecting it. It emerged near the corner of the ramp, nose breaking the surface in a slow rise, eyes reflecting terminal lights in faint glints. The water around it shifted softly as it adjusted position, hovering between curiosity and caution. A deckhand noticed immediately. He leaned lightly on the railing, observing rather than reacting. The presence of the animal had already shaped the day's pattern, and there was no reason to disrupt it now. He radioed its location simply as confirmation, routine documentation of conditions affecting operations. Passengers noticed too. A man carrying a soft-sided cooler paused briefly behind the safety line. He watched the seal, then adjusted his grip on the zipper and kept moving. Nearby, a woman tightened the lid on a plastic container before placing it back inside her bag. These gestures were subtle, unspoken acknowledgments of shared space. The seal floated closer than before. Not dangerously close, but near enough that its whiskers and nose were clearly visible beneath the ramp lights. It turned toward footsteps overhead, tracking sound patterns. Occasionally it dipped below, resurfacing in nearly the same place. Patient, observant, calm. Boarding began for the final time that day. The ramp gate lowered. Engines hummed forward. Pedestrians followed in quiet sequence. The seal remained in position, watching from below as shadows crossed above its field of view. One traveler paused longer than necessary. He crouched slightly, peering down with interest. A crew member approached and spoke gently, guiding him forward. The moment resolved quickly. Safety flow resumed. Curiosity gave way to routine. Coolers moved overhead. Plastic shells, canvas bags, hard-latched containers. None opened, none lowered toward the edge. Years of signage, reminders, and observation had formed habits stronger than impulse. The seal surfaced once more, nose angled upward. Then, as the ferry engines deepened and the vessel pulled away, it turned with the changing water. The wake spread outward in overlapping lines of motion. It drifted briefly along the current, then slipped beneath the surface, disappearing into dim water without disturbance. The ramp cleared. Terminal lights reflected off wet concrete. Crews secured chains and checked gate locks. Vehicles departed. The sound of engines faded along distant roads. Nothing dramatic had occurred. No confrontation, no feeding, no dropped food or open lids. Only presence, animal and human, shaping behavior through quiet awareness. By nightfall, the harbor returned to stillness, and in that stillness remained the lesson carried through the day. In working spaces where sea life and human routine intersect, coexistence depends not on control but on attentiveness. The seal had watched, the travelers had adapted, and through it all, from morning tide to final departure, the coolers stayed closed.